Hello there, dear listeners. Before we get to the episode today, we want to take a moment to talk about the June 24th Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. This decision stripped away the right and access to safe and legal abortions in many states. Restricting access to comprehensive reproductive care, including abortion, threatens the health and independence of all Americans, and they're already talking about using this decision to attack other rights as well. To learn more about what you can do to help, go to choice.crd.co. We encourage you to speak up, take care, and spread the word. And now, back to your regularly scheduled idiocy.
I'm Grimm.
I'm Zolgar. That's Kaiju.
And this is Two Idiots and a Dog, Idiots on Film,
where we explore movies that we love
or think are important for pop culture. This week, we're talking about 2014's Godzilla.
We chose this particular movie because, again, we are both Kaiju fans, and there was a bit of a toss-up between this one and the original 1954 Godzilla. I don't really remember exactly why we chose this one.
I think it was because it was more recent, and in more recent memory.
I think so, and also partially because, I hate to admit this, I actually have not seen the original 1954 Godzilla. I need to. I really do, but it just, I've somehow managed to miss it. I've seen a lot of the other classic Godzilla movies, but not the original.
Don't worry, he will pay for his sins. So I want to preface this entire episode right now by just out of the gate saying that we do both love this movie.
Yeah, it is easily one of the best American Kaiju films.
That said, we're about to rip it to shreds.
Little bit.
I think we should just get into it right away with one of the biggest problems on display in the film, and this isn't a knock against the quality of the film or anything like that, but so much as what takes place in the film, and that is the human stupidity on display here is staggering.
Granted, that is kind of a general element of Kaiju films, that more often than not, if humans are involved, human stupidity makes things worse.
Generally speaking, and boy howdy does it make things worse in this one. I mean, they should have given Bryan Cranston's character a job the first time he got arrested.
Also, I think Bryan Cranston's character should have lived, because he was more interesting.
Yeah, a little bit of a side tangent from the human stupidity for a moment. Our main protagonist ends up being Ford Brody, or as I refer to him, Captain Whitebread.
And I keep telling you, he is a lieutenant. Do not give him a promotion.
He survived an enraged Muto head-on. He can get a promotion.
Okay, he gets a promotion at the end of the movie.
The fact of the matter is, he is the single most boring white man protagonist I have seen in a while, and that is a feat.
I have seen a few more boring, but I watch a lot more movies than you do.
Also a lot worse movies than I do.
His entire thing is, he is a soldier. He is very good at his job. He loves his family, and he has a strained relationship with his father, but won't acknowledge that he loves his father.
Now tell us which character from what movie we're talking about, and if you get even remotely close, I will be staggeringly impressed.
Well, if you don't know what movie we're talking about, of course, but...
Yeah, but if you go off of that description alone, how many movie protagonists have we just described?
Let's see. Also the main character from The Predator. How many other movies?
If we started listing them off, we'd be here all day. So, moving on. Now, to be clear, we're going to get back on the human stupidity in just a moment here, but to be clear, I want to be clear, I am not bragging on the actor. He did a good job with the role he was given. Unfortunately, the role he was given was a very boring protagonist.
Yeah, every actor in this film did great with their role.
They did a fantastic job. There were two standouts for me. Elizabeth Olsen as Elle, Ford's wife, was amazing. And, of course, someone we've brought up, I think even either in other note sessions or other episodes or something, but Ken Wantanabe, who gets the 2 best lines in this whole movie.
I still argue that it's one line, just has a pause in it.
And we'll get to that in a bit. But everybody else was great. Bryan Cranston was great. Everybody played their roles well. The guy playing Admiral Stenz did a great job playing him. It's just that Admiral Stenz, and here's our segue back to human stupidity, is a moron. Who brings in monster experts, grills them for... How long were they in that room? It was kind of implied they were in there for a while.
Yeah, quite a while.
And then completely ignores everything they said.
The American military, that's who.
Apparently, at least, especially if it's in a movie. I mean, human incompetence makes this film so much worse from a living in that story perspective.
Yeah, the amount of human incompetence we see in this movie, from them not listening to the experts, to using too small of ordnance against the kaiju, to...
We're gonna use a nuclear weapon on a species that feeds on radiation. The blast will kill them.
You know, if the blast doesn't kill them, you're really screwed, so you need to be 10 million% certain that the blast will kill them, and so far, you haven't even hurt them with any munitions you've used, so maybe don't assume that.
Yeah, even Monarch, the so-called monster experts, have some staggering moments of stupidity. I mean, again, they should have just given Cranston a job as soon as he started trying to break in there, screaming and hollering about how they're covering stuff up. And he was there that day, and, like, as soon as that reaches somebody at Monarch, they should have been like, him, we need him, bring him in. And then they built that wire electrical cage to try to flash fry the cocoon, which was totally stupid. Why would you create a system to kill a monster that generates its own EMP field that uses electricity?
Because you're stupid. And because you didn't learn anything in the...
15 years. They had it in that cocoon for 15 years, and they apparently learned absolutely nothing.
They didn't... It was longer than 15 years that they didn't learn anything, because you have to remember, Monarch has been around since, I believe it was the 1970s.
The Muto specifically was 15 years.
Yeah, but I mean, Monarch has been around and known of giant monsters since the events of Kong Skull Island. So they would know that giant monsters are dangerous as hell.
Mm-hmm. And to their credit, Ken Watanabe's character does straight up say, kill it when it starts waking up. Just straight up, no hesitation, like, nope, kill it. The issue we run into is the methodology was horrifically incorrect. What you do is, you call up the U.S. military and say, hey, we need a MOAB. And you put it in the enclosure with the cocoon. And when the cocoon starts moving and it's no longer safe to study, you blow it. For those that don't know, the MOAB stands for Mother of All Bombs and is one of the largest, if not the largest, conventional explosive munition on the planet. And it isn't quite as impressive as a nuke, but it'll still flatten more than a city block.
You said blow it.
You see what I have to work with? Which, kind of a subset of the human stupidity factor here, and something that you already touched on, is the ordnance used in this movie is horrifically incorrect for the situation.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned in a note session that this is a problem with kaiju movies. And before I go off on the ordnance-related tangent, which is absolutely my wheelhouse, I'm going to have you go ahead and just kind of lay that all out. The origins, the root, and what's going on.
So one of the things that we run into with kaiju films, it's been a thing for the entirety of kaiju movies that I am aware of. Human ordnance do not affect kaiju. And there's a bit of a reason for that in this one, and Grimm will go into that in a few minutes, but the problem is, even in other movies, and yes, we're talking about Godzilla, but you can't talk about Godzilla without talking about the entire overarching genre. No matter what they use, we watch them throw all kinds of high-end modern munitions at a giant monster and not even necessarily not kill it, but not even hurt it. Because it's like, in a note session, I brought up the thing to Grimm. Okay, what happens if you shoot a person with a BB gun? They're going to be annoyed because they got hit by a BB. If it's a really high pressure, they might have a BB embedded a couple inches in them. Otherwise, they're going to have a bruise. It's not going to do anything to them. But if you shoot them with 10,000 BBs, probably still not going to kill them. You might, depending on the pressure and all that. But it's going to hurt like hell. And we don't see monsters ever get even injured by the weapons we throw at them. And this draws from the fact that, again, going all the way back to the originals, back in the 1950s and 60s, the munitions we had available were not powerful enough to hurt something the size of Godzilla. It's just weapons technology has progressed, but apparently so have kaiju?
Yeah, and especially with modern ordnance, this can be a big problem. Now, in this movie, I said this was a subset of human stupidity. Why would that be if this is clearly a writing film choice which takes place outside the universe the movie takes place in? I make that distinction because we have ordnance that would absolutely ruin a kaiju's day. And none of it is used in this movie. Some of it being taken off the board makes sense. The fighter jets that absolutely would have had air-to-ground missiles that could have done something to these things were taken out before they could even get a shot off because of the EMP waves that the mutos generate. Okay, that makes a certain amount of sense. But there are so many other weapon systems we have access to that absolutely could have stopped or slowed down a Muto or Godzilla, and we do not see them used. What we see is a lot of tanks, which are not designed for an armored target that size at all. We see a lot of shipboard guns, which again are designed for shoreline bombardment and taking out other ships. And yeah, modern naval ships are armored and beefy, but they're nowhere near kaiju level. A lot of those guns are like, I'm working purely off of the top of my head here, so take this with a grain of salt, go ahead and look it up for yourself. They're like 75 millimeter, which is pretty big for, people and people equipment, but we're talking walking, living, armored skyscrapers. I'm not sure that even qualifies as BB. We used some anti-tank rockets, which, depending on the thickness of the armor on these kaiju, might not be enough. Remember, these are armaments that are designed to punch through a relatively thin layer of armor and get to the squishy bits inside on a tank. These things are way bigger than tanks. And just going off of basic structural theory and analysis, that armor plating has got to be way thicker to compensate.
Don't forget the most powerful weapons they used against them.
Ah, yes.
Rifles.
Because 5.56 is going to stop Godzilla. Yeah, no.
Maybe if you shoot him in the eye enough times?
I really don't think even then. You would do damage, but you're not going to stop him. And now you have his attention. And I feel very sorry for you. It is definitely a trope of the genre that the ordnance doesn't do anything, but the ordnance we see in this film wouldn't do anything. And the fact that we aren't seeing ordnance that would is absolutely human stupidity.
Except, the big-ass nuke that is totally going to kill them with the blast.
Listen, okay, the entire subplot with the nuke feels more or less extraneous, save for being the film's primary allegory for warning against nuclear weapons. Also, side note, all you need is the internal warhead. Why did you transport the entire missile casing?
Now, the subplot with the nuke serves another purpose than being the allegory for nuclear Armageddon.
Oh, right. It gives white bread something to do.
Yeah, it gives our generic, boring protagonist a way to be the hero of the story.
Yeah, the problem is, humans are not the heroes of kaiju films. Kaiju are the heroes of kaiju films. The only time a human is the hero of a kaiju film is if it's a single monster and they manage to actually bring it down, and that happens far more rare in the genre than you might think.
Not actually true. Interesting trivia for you. In the Godzilla franchise, that is the overarching franchise, if it's just Godzilla, humans beat Godzilla every time. If it is Godzilla and another monster, then one of the two monsters defeats the other monster and then goes away.
Yeah. In this case, we have Godzilla fighting other monsters, so the human trying to make the humans heroic is pointless.
Yeah.
It breaks the mold. And I want to point out that even in 1954, where humans did defeat Godzilla, they had to create a nonsense sci-fi super weapon. The Oxygen Destroyer. Which... It was 1954, okay? I'm not going to rag on them too much. But that would just not fly today. Honestly, I could harp on the human stupidity for quite a bit longer, if I was being honest with you, because this movie gives us a lot of examples of it. But we do have more to talk about, so...
Well, let's take just a moment and talk about a couple of the spots where humans actually do intelligent things in this movie. Because there's only like 3 of them.
Yeah, pretty much.
Let's start with honestly the best line in the entire movie. When Ken Watanabe's character says, I've got the exact quote, but I don't feel like looking it up, but something to the effect of, the arrogance of man is believing that nature is in our control and not the other way around. And then he closes that off with,
let them fight.
The best line in the movie, and it just shows that he's intelligent. He knows that we do not have anything that will stop them.
And he's the character that when the Mutos started waking up was like, kill it now. Just kill it, push the button, fry it.
Yeah, and his character has a great arc going into King of Monsters.
Kind of a sad and tragic arc, but a great arc. So good.
And it is a case of taking that major character who's really important and giving them a death that fits their character so much. But not going any further into King of Monsters right now.
Yeah. The character serves another very important role, and that is he is our primary link to the nuclear allegories. Beyond just the Mutos feeding off of radiation and the nuclear bomb being a bad idea, he is our primary vehicle for examining why it's a bad idea within the context of the movie. He carries with him his father's watch from Hiroshima, which I would hope you all know the significance of that, but I'm still going to spell it out just in case there's maybe 1 or 2 of you that have been living under a rock. That is one of the 2 locations the United States dropped nuclear weapons on Japan at the end of World War II. It is one of the instances that has sparked Japan's very interesting relationship with nuclear power in general, and led to the creation of Godzilla as a franchise. And to be clear, just because I love this franchise, I just want to make a real quick side note that doesn't justify what we did, okay?
There is no justification for what we did. I'm sorry.
Yeah, there isn't.
But before we get more political...
Yeah, so he is our primary vehicle on the human side for the folly of mishandling nuclear power and sending the bomb into San Francisco and using it as bait or whatever absolutely was folly.
Yeah.
And mishandling.
He is also our connection to Monarch.
He is. He's the primary Monarch scientist on this particular team. And
he is, as we find, one of the foremost experts on Godzilla. or Gojira, as his name actually is.
Which is actually spelled out in the movie. He says Gojira, and everybody else is like, Godzilla. Because, we're dumb Americans. That's what we do.
Let's see. Other smart characters in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Elle is actually one of these smarter characters we see.
Yeah. Even as she's dealing with her own stuff, she's still able to stop for a moment and make informed decisions that benefit her child.
Yeah, there's, you've got the classic scene of, okay, so, of course, so she can't evacuate so she's a nurse in the ER.
Yeah.
So...
critical personnel.
Yeah, critical personnel has to be there to help people and all that. And, of course, Ford, a.k.a. generic white bread husband, calls and says that he's on his way, he'll be there by sunrise. And they're evacuating everyone. Ford's not there yet. And Elle's friend is like, let me take your son to the evacuation place so he is safe. And at first, Elle's like, no, Ford's coming. But then, just as the bus is getting ready to leave, she runs up with her son and sends her son with her friend because she realizes that even if Ford is on his way, the best thing to do for her son is send her son to safety and not keep him there where he will be in the way and in danger.
Yeah. Sometimes the best way to stay close to your family and keep them safe is to send them away. And the fact that we actually have a character in a movie who realizes this in a crisis situation is kind of a big deal.
Especially a mother. More often than not, we would see the father pull well, it's going to be safest if we send you away. And the mother's like, no, I need to keep my baby close to me.
Yeah, and this is very big because prior to the phone call where she has this conversation with Ford in the first place, she hasn't heard from him in like 2-3 days. And there's giant monsters on the news, and...
Not just giant monster on the news. Giant monsters in Hawaii on the news where she knew her husband was catching a connecting flight, and the monsters destroyed the airport.
Yep, so as far as she knows, her husband is dead. And then she gets the phone call, or more specifically, the hospital gets the phone call, and she was originally going to shrug it off, and then, like, that's your husband, and she immediately is like, oh, no. And she actually has a mini breakdown on the phone, which is, I think, Elizabeth Olsen's best scene acting-wise in this movie, because she sold that. She sold that hard. Like, she knows her husband is trying to convey important information to her, but she has been putting on the strong mom face. Her husband is alive. She is talking to her husband. She allows herself that little bit of moment of just venting that emotional turmoil.
Can I just say that Elizabeth Olsen is an amazing actress?
She is.
At first, I didn't actually realize that this was the same actress that was playing Scarlet Witch until you mentioned it in the note session.
This is slightly off topic, but I honestly feel like the MCU is underutilizing Elizabeth Olsen.
So underutilizing her.
Anyway, back on track here. That's our two smarties. Who's your third?
The bus driver.
Smartest man in the whole movie. He saw what was going down and he went, nope, we're out of here.
I don't care what I have to run over, blast through, or what to get these kids that are in my care off of this bridge.
Yeah, and just absolutely the smartest man in the whole movie. Hands down.
One other just tiny, insignificant, but very smart person. And this is just something that I loved the detail of. And that is when the bus is driving off the bridge, it cuts between a soldier and whichever monster they're shooting at. Was it Godzilla?
That was Godzilla at the bridge, yeah.
Okay, I couldn't remember which one they were shooting at, and we see this soldier that the bus crosses by drop his rifle so the line of fire is not in the way of this bus. Now, he's not firing, but he still has the barrel discipline to not have his gun pointed at civilians at all.
Yeah. The guys on the bridge in general kind of had their poop in a group. As soon as the monster showed up, like, they were getting into position, they were ready to go, and the ships engage, and as they're engaging, they're like, whoa. Hold fire, Stryker, hold fire, civilians on the bridge. But they'd already launched their first salvo. Which is where we come into something that I want to bring up really quick, because we're going to touch on it again when we get to some of the philosophy in this film. And that is, as we're seeing these rockets and ship gun shells barreling in on the bridge, rising up is Godzilla's armored spine. Those big, bulky, armored, chitinous, bony plates that are on his back, intercepting all of those shells. And in that moment, we kind of get the impression Godzilla was sheltering those civilians, which doesn't sound right, but that is kind of what we saw, whether he intended to or not.
Yeah, we kind of get a feeling that maybe Godzilla isn't just a raw, destructive monster.
I think this is the good segue into the philosophy segment, unless you want to touch on something else real quick.
I don't have anything off the top of my head, so if there's anything else, we can touch upon that afterwards.
Okay, so with the portrayal of Godzilla in this film, we have... And I'm going to try to rush through this because we could talk about this for a very long time. There's a subtle shift in the portrayal here of Godzilla from pure destructive force to ecological protector, something that is originally outlined by Ken Watanabe's character in the confines of the story. And I find that to be an interesting shift, yet the references to everything that's going on, Bikini Atoll, Hiroshima, etc., throughout the backing scenes of the film, so to speak, still maintain that link as an allegory for nuclear Armageddon. And I thought it was really well done, and there's a very strong philosophical undertone throughout the entire movie of that. Honestly, the quote you already said from his character sums up perfectly.
Yeah, that we think we're in control, and that's just our ego. It's the other way around. You know, the modern kaiju movies, or I should say actually the modern Godzilla movies, have this tendency to make Godzilla a neutral force, more of a force of balance as opposed to a raw destructive force. We see him being a raw destructive force when he is directly opposing something man is doing. Other times we see him opposing monsters that are just wanting to rampage and destroy.
Yeah, it's a really nice shift, because the fact of the matter is not all kaiju are going to be our enemy in the confines of a world where such creatures exist. There is going to be that little bit of interplay between force of nature versus force of destruction.
Well, let me ask you this. Are we the enemy of ants?
Depends on who you ask. Have you tried asking the ants?
I mean, I'm the enemy of ants, at least if they're in my backyard biting my dog.
Well, yeah, but I mean, they shot first at that point. They asked for it. Yeah. So there's a lot, that's the overall philosophical undertone of the film, though, is nature versus, is this destruction, is this protection, balance, all these different things. And the fact of the matter is, even the Muto are not themselves our enemy. They're just creatures that don't care about us at all. They just want to meet up, mate, have babies, and propagate their species, and Godzilla's like, no, your time is over.
Mostly because we see the destructive power of 2 Mutos.
Yeah.
And how many eggs was that?
That was a lot of eggs.
That was a lot of eggs. I even actually had a note in my notes of just, that is a lot of eggs.
That is a lot of eggs, yeah. There's one final thing I kind of want to touch on real quick. Do you got anything else?
I think I did, but I forgot it, so it must not have been important.
That's not how nuclear waste is stored! Nah! Alright, that's all I got. You got anything?
Well, okay, we have torn this movie apart quite a bit.
Yeah.
There are a couple of things that I think should be mentioned that are, well, positives and negatives. Oh, there is actually one other thing we want to talk about.
Okay, what you got?
Okay, this is a Godzilla movie.
Mm-hmm.
We do not see a giant monster at all until 35 minutes into the movie. And in 35 minutes, we don't see Godzilla. We see a Muto. And then we do not see Godzilla until almost an hour into the movie, and we don't get to actually see Godzilla fight the Mutos until an hour and 40 minutes into the movie.
Mm-hmm. Some of that is actually in keeping with the roots of the franchise, however. Godzilla 1954, we actually don't see Godzilla until over 20 minutes into the movie. So I honestly think that maybe if our first monster here had been Godzilla, maybe? Even just if they'd played that stock footage from Bikini Atoll earlier in the film, that would have at least set things up for us.
Yeah, the fact that if this movie had not been called Godzilla, we would not have realized it was a Godzilla movie until nearly an hour into the movie. We would have thought it was just a generic giant monster movie. And, you know, I get the kind of the drawback to the original, but I also don't entirely agree because the genre has changed since then, and telling the story in the same way, I don't personally feel it works as well.
You're allowed to be wrong.
But regardless, even if it's okay that we don't see Godzilla until an hour into the movie, and I still think we should have seen Godzilla sooner than halfway through the movie, the fact that we don't get to see Godzilla fight the Muto until there's like less than half an hour left of the movie is kind of... Well, they spend so much time focusing on the human element. So we have this nuclear subplot. We have the whole thing of Ford's family and how much he cares about them and wants to get back to them. So we have all of these human element dramas. And I get that, especially for American audiences, we need that. But that's not why we watch giant monster movies.
I mean, just as a quick side note, that was the problem with most of the Michael Bay Transformer movies. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed them, but they were more about the people than the Transformers, and I'm just like, I'm sorry, does this say Mark Wahlberg on there? No, this says Transformers! Where's my giant robots?
Which, I know we've talked about it in a previous episode, but this is something that Pacific Rim did right.
Yup.
And by the way, screw you, Robot Stone Age, for not liking that movie.
I'm sorry, who? I only pay attention to opinions from relevant people. Love you guys. Alright, I think... You got anything else real quick?
You know, I do just want to mention, the special effects were great, and dear God, that Halo jump scene was absolutely stunningly gorgeous.
Even if the actual act of Halo jumping into a city is pretty much suicide.
Also, can we have a Helldivers movie, please?
Alright, I think I'm going to end us off with one final note here, and that is a note I had about when they're covering Godzilla getting back up and shuffling off like, job done, gonna go home later, guys. King of the Monsters? You're right. That's it for this week. Please consider rating, reviewing, following, and all that other nonsense on your favorite podcast platforms.
If you'd like to tell us how much of idiots we are, or send Kaiju fan mail, you can email us at tiaadmedia@gmail.com, or you can join us on Discord and the various social media platforms linked in the show notes.
You should also check out this great podcast. Who are we promoting this week?
I don't know. We record these well in advance. I guess we'll just have to listen to the promo to see who it is.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
We are Cheap Seat Reviews, the podcast that explores the Hollywood film industry for the greater good.
The greater good.
Join us each week as we dive into the depths of streaming movies for the greater good.
The greater good.
You can find us on Twitter at CheapSeatCast, Facebook.com/CheapSeatReviews, and our website is cheapseatreviews.libsyn.com. All for the greater good.
How can this be for the greater good?
The greater good.
Shut it!
That was the greatest promo I've ever heard. It moved me to tears.
It was so good, I already forgot who it was for. I guess I have to go check the show notes now.
We'd also like to give a quick thank you to our supporters on Patreon and Ko-fi.
Especially these idiots.
That's going to be Random Warrior and Rain. Thank you.
We couldn't do it without you.
If you like what we do, please consider supporting us on Patreon or Ko-fi.
You can get access to episodes a week early, shoutouts in our episodes, and special behind-the-scenes bonus content.
Also, we won't put commercials in our Patreon episodes.
You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/tiaadmedia and ko-fi.com/tiaadmedia.
Those links are in our show notes as well.
And of course, thank you for listening to Two Idiots and a Dog.